actually, well, one of the big things that we're finding now is that it can actually regulate weight, right? So we actually found that mice that were on a choline deficient diet gained about 30% more weight than animals that had choline.
Really? Same
Right. Yeah.
exact diet, just choline
Yes,
was deficient.
yes, yes, yes. This is published in 2023 in Aging Cell, and it's you can look it up. Choline deficiency promotes a lot of system-wide pathologies and dysregulation of metabolic function. And we found that when we looked at the mice, we were pretty shocked. The only thing we did is take choline away from their diet, and they gained
Yeah.
tremendous amount of weight. Yeah.
It is a very basic way to think about this. So why would it have effects on weight and inflammation in the brain and insulin? Like all of these things is a way to think about this simply that choline is a precursor to probably multiple key signaling molecules that have a variety of roles in metabolism and various aspects of biology. And therefore, if you're deficient in it, it's just going to sort of disrupt signaling in lots of different ways.
Yes, that's exactly the way to think about it, right? And it's probably going to do it not in a way where you think where it's like, oh, you're probably going to get, there's going to be obesity and then you're going to get aspects of diabetes or glucose metabolism impairments and then Alzheimer's disease or pathologies that can initiate that. They're all probably happening synergistically,
Yeah.
and then ultimately you see all of these pop up at the same time. But the one thing that I just want to make this comment. The one thing that we're very excited about is that we're really starting to show that in human cases, individuals that are pre-diabetic have low circulating choline in their blood, right? So if you take individuals that have a BMI of obese and you compare those individuals to individuals that are normal, healthy weight individuals, you find that the levels of choline in their blood in the obese individuals are drastically lower. Why is that exciting? Because if we can address aspects of pre-diabetes by simply supplementing with choline, that would be fantastic.
Mm-hmm. And so some of the results that you were pointing to that you found in rodents, to what extent are those results that you're rescuing choline deficiency in mice that are deficient versus can you take normal mice eating sort of standard mouse chow and then supplement with extra choline and then see improvements in anything?
Yeah, actually, that was the premise of a lot of this work, right? So once again, some of the first reports showing that choline supplementation was beneficial comes back from studies done, back in the late 1990s and early 2000s, where they actually took normal rats and they just gave them more choline versus normal choline, and they actually found that having more choline actually improved their behaviors in terms of learning and memory and other forms of cognition. That actually established that choline is critically important and more of it could be beneficial. What we're trying to do with our work is to say, is a deficiency in it, which is more prevalent in our society, potentially leading to a lot of these detrimental outcomes that we see in disease.
And so everything points to obviously deficiency is very bad. You definitely want to avoid choline deficiency. Supplementation is good. Even liberal supplementation can have benefits in non-deficient animals, and you're going to be pretty hard pressed to overdose on something like this.
Yes, yeah. I mean, like I said, getting close to 3, 4 grams of choline a day would be very difficult, especially since most of us are deficient, right?
Yeah.
Most people are deficient. I myself, my whole lab, we are big proponents of taking choline on a daily basis, given our literature. So we have to practice what we preach.
Interesting. And we talked about Alzheimer's earlier. You talked about some of the effects choline has on metabolism, things like insulin resistance. How has the thinking started to change around Alzheimer's and whether or not it's rooted in things like insulin resistance and a metabolic issue?
Yeah. So, going to the evidence, as you mentioned, type 3 diabetes, right? The individuals that are typically an obese BMI, as well as have forms of type 2 diabetes, typically have an increased risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. And the reason why we believe there's a link is because insulin resistance can happen in the periphery, but it can also happen in your brain, right? If your receptors in your brain that require binding of insulin to allow glucose to come in are now compromised, that is going to start to affect the function of those neurons. And studies have shown that if you don't have proper glucose in your brain, that can lead to neuroinflammation. And what does that neuroinflammation tie back to? A lot of these proteinopathies that we discussed earlier in this conversation. Yeah.
So, what are some of the things that you guys are working on in the lab now, either extensions of the work that we've already discussed or interesting areas that we didn't touch on?
Yeah, so a few projects, and both in the human space using human participants as well as postmortem brain tissue and animal models as well. So, in terms of glyphosate, as I mentioned, we are interested in looking at the effects of the upper limit of the dose that's allowed to be consumed by humans on a daily basis, at 1.0 milligrams per kilogram per day, the European dose, and then a corrected dose by the FDA in rodents. So, we're looking at some of those studies. For choline, we are actually now starting to look at what the benefits of supplementation are for tauopathies, right? So we know there's evidence suggesting that if you supplement the diet in an Alzheimer's model, you do see benefits. What about a disease state where there's only tau pathology,
Hmm.
right? So we currently have a few studies where we're looking at genetically modified mice that develop tau pathology to see if it can reduce or prevent some of the aspects of neuroinflammation that, will aggravate that specific type of pathology. Yeah, sorry.
No, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, and another important area that I'm really interested in, it's a fascinating, really cool area of research, is one of our collaborators at, I keep mentioning TGen, the Translational Genomics Research Institute in Arizona. One of our collaborators developed a lab that's on wheels. It's called the Mobile Lab, right? It's very cool. I remember when this colleague came to me and said, Ramon, I have this great idea to develop this mobile lab. We can go around the state or really, the United States and collect data, collect, blood specimens. We just park it and tell people that, hey, come be part of our study. So that's actually now occurring. And here in Arizona, and what we're really doing is leveraging that mobile lab to develop a few experiments tied to glyphosate and also choline. So, what we find is that depending on where individuals live, rural versus urban, we're finding that individuals that live in rural communities have a higher incidence of cognitive decline and Alzheimer's disease. Why is that? So, we're teaming up with this group and we're going to these different locations and we're trying to understand what does the circulating choline levels look like in someone who lives in a rural community versus an urban community? What are the levels of glyphosate looking like? If you live in an agriculture community, are you actually finding that there's more glyphosate and also less choline being consumed that might be triggering a lot of these cognitive decline and neurodegenerative disorders that you see in these individuals? Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm. A lot of stuff ties together at the level of diet in terms of the dietary choices people make. So, for example, based on the glyphosate story you told me and the choline stuff you told me, if someone was eating a largely plant-based diet with little to no animal products and they were not being careful to A, supplement with things like choline, and B, focus on organic foods, then they're probably getting exposed to more glyphosate and they're probably likely deficient in choline. So these
Yeah.
things can, even if there's no direct connection between those two threads, they can come together in a package, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean that ties back to these neurodegenerative disorders. They're so complex, right?
Yeah.
There's no, one environmental factor that we know of that leads to Alzheimer's disease or these detrimental outcomes. It's going to be a combination of the environment, right?
Yeah.
So our goal is to go and look at what are these different components and what can we do to improve the lives of these individuals because we know that life expectancy is only going up. More cases of Alzheimer's disease are occurring. What can we do to give everyone the best chance possible to not go through this type of disorder in their life? Yeah.
Well, this is really good stuff. I talk a lot about nutrition, but this is one of the more clear cut cases where supplementation pretty much makes sense across the board. I'm talking about choline and deficiency is it's very obvious why you don't want to be deficient in this case. So really interesting, especially if you are eating certain diets that are going to be naturally choline deficient because you're not eating animal products. So that's really interesting stuff. Any final thoughts you want to leave people with about anything we discussed today?
Yeah, I mean, our goal really is to find ways in which we can improve the lives of individuals that are aging and, the general public. And we believe that, these lifestyle factors play a very big role in, what we will experience later on in our life. And so here at ASU and with our collaborating partners, we're doing everything we can to ensure individuals as they age with their memories and have a graceful aging process. Yeah.
All right. Well, Dr. Ramon Velazquez, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me.